Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis on August 14th on a wonderfully overcast and slightly cool day here in Texas. Today I want to do a second part of my Unpopular Orchid Opinions series and discuss 3 issues that I think need to be thrown by the wayside. And today we're going to talk humidity trays as a method of elevating humidity around your orchids. We're talking flash photography at night when photographing your blooming orchids, and finally hydrogen peroxide and the fact that you don't need hydrogen peroxide in your orchid regimen. But first, humidity trays. Obviously people are using humidity trays to elevate the humidity around their orchids, and this is especially true for folks growing inside all year round, windowsill growers, or people just growing in their apartments or homes where the relative humidity inside can be fairly low. The common thought is that if you have a small tray of pebbles underneath your orchids, that's somehow going to create a microclimate around your orchids and elevate that humidity as the water evaporates. But that is not true. As that water evaporates, it's immediately going into the rest of the room. So if you were to measure the relative humidity with some type of a device right at the surface of the humidity tray where the pebbles are, typically where folks have the humidity tray and then pebbles, and the orchids sit on top of the pebbles, and then there's water evaporating. And then as that water evaporates, it's supposed to elevate the humidity around the orchids. But again, if you were to measure that right at the surface where the pebbles are, there's probably an increased humidity. But by the time you get to the point where the plants are, that humidity has dissipated into the rest of the room. And so it's not very useful. In fact, it's not useful at all. And what ends up happening is the water typically drains into the humidity trays as you water your plants. Those nutrients get into those rocks and just becomes kind of a slimy, gross mess. So I suggest not even worrying about that at all. If you really want to increase the humidity around your orchids, you need some kind of enclosure that holds that humidity in. And that's typically going to come in the form of an aquarium or terrarium or grow tent, or some kind of method where you have water evaporating from below, and then that ambient humidity is held in around the plants by 4 walls. Even if it's an aquarium with the lid open on top, just having those 4 walls around the plants is going to at least create some kind of a microclimate. But unless you have those walls around your plants, that humidity will just dissipate into the room. It's pretty basic physics, to be honest. So I wouldn't waste my time and money on a humidity tray. I would better repurpose those funds into orchids that are either better adapted for your particular humidity conditions, or investing in some kind of walled device, whether it's a grow tent or an aquarium or a terrarium or an orchidarium or whatever kind of arium you want to purchase. The next unpopular orchid opinion that I'm going to discuss right now, and that I see happening fairly regularly online and on social media, is folks taking pictures of their orchids at night with flash photography. First, before I dive into the why I think that's happening, I want to say you can never, ever, ever get an orchid photo that shows the full array of colors and shapes and just the general attractiveness of orchids by photographing them at night with the flash. Every single time it always washes out the colors, and that's only for the parts of the flower that are closest to the camera, and then the parts of the flower that are farther back are just in the shade, in the shadow. And so what you have is this mixture of orchid photos. So what you have is this mixture of photographs where some part of the flower is overexposed and the color is washed out, and then the rest of the flower is in the shadows, and again you can't see the full range of colors. This seems to be a trend that even prominent orchid growers are doing it. I don't understand why anybody would do that. It's never, never, never more attractive than using sunlight to photograph your orchids. So I suspect this started because one of the best orchid growers and photographers of the orchids is Mauro Rosam in Brazil. You know, for many, many years now, he's been providing photos with a black background, a solid black background, and these absolutely stunning photographs of the orchids. I kind of wonder if folks think that he's taking those photographs at night. He's not. But before I go on, you should look up Mauro Rosam orchids, and then this is on a Google search or on whatever browser you prefer, and you'll see some outstanding photographs of really amazing specimens. But what he does is he has a black backdrop, and then he photographs that during the day. So what he's doing is he's getting the black backdrop, which really accentuates the colors of the orchids, and then he's using sunlight to really accentuate the colors as well. So he's got this 1-2 knockout punch, and then I think people are taking those photos and saying, oh, he's taking pictures at night with the flash, which is not true. Again, you really just cannot capture the depth of orchid colors using flash photography at night. You know, I was debating whether or not to show any of these in this video, but I don't want to highlight anyone who's doing this or call anyone out, and I'm just going to have to let the folks watching this video compare and contrast. If you see an orchid photo, especially on Facebook or Instagram, where it's clearly taken at night with a flash, you know, you can tell that this is a low quality photo. I don't know, I don't want to go so far as to saying it's folks being lazy in their orchid photography, but it certainly doesn't take nearly as much effort to point and shoot a photograph at night with a flash than it does to set up a black backdrop, angle your plant correctly in the sun so that the sun is just at the right angle so as not to wash out the colors. But you know, maybe it is a matter of laziness, maybe it's just not understanding how photography actually works. But the results should speak for themselves, right? You know, you compare Mauro's photos with sunlight orchids, sunlight lit orchids compared to these flash ones, and they just don't compare. Finally, I want to talk about hydrogen peroxide to treat root rot in orchids. So there's a lot of folks online that say hydrogen peroxide is basically a cure-all for any algae outbreaks or microorganisms that come in and may cause root rot. Well, it turns out that may or may not be true, but the real problem is that the hydrogen peroxide typically kills the orchid roots. So there's an interesting study by Renata Goosen and Kimberly A. Williams of Kansas State University. My understanding is that the paper is not quite published, but there is a research poster online that I'm showing you here now. It basically says that phytotoxicity occurs, and of course phytotoxicity is anything that really harms the plants or causes adverse effects to the plants. So they show that roots treated with anything greater than 3% concentration of hydrogen peroxide will kill the orchid roots outright, and that 3% concentration is low enough that it doesn't kill the orchid roots, but it does set the plant back. So you might be killing some microorganisms. You really run the risk of actually killing your plant. So, you know, I guess you kind of have to weigh the cost benefit of the treatment. Additionally, they found that algae was not killed in a single treatment of hydrogen peroxide. So, while it kills your plants, it doesn't necessarily kill all the microorganisms that you're targeting. And of course, algae is a proxy for some of these other root rot causing microorganisms. So, you know, I tried this and found similar results maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I had read that hydrogen peroxide was useful. I tried it on a plant that wasn't doing well, and I put it on the roots, and of course the plant died. So ever since then, it's been a little disturbing to me to see this sort of quote-unquote home remedy coming up time and time again and being promoted by some folks online as this sort of cure-all for anything in the root system. I've seen people saying that it cures algae, it cures root rot, it will kill bush snails, it will do all kinds of things to help your plants, and then you end up with dead plants. So let's not do that. Let's just remove hydrogen peroxide from our sort of treatment regimens altogether, and use a number of other things that are really more specific for what you're targeting, whether it be bush snails or algae or root rot, or maybe you cut your plants and you're trying to prevent infection. There's better ways to prevent that infection than using hydrogen peroxide. And this study really is the first conclusive evidence that I've seen in a scientific manner that sort of takes the anecdotal evidence of people promoting hydrogen peroxide online or comparing it to what folks do in the garden and then applying it to orchids, and really focusing on the effects of hydrogen peroxide on our plants themselves. So it's really good to see that nail in the coffin for hydrogen peroxide as a treatment for root problems of orchid. All right, just like last time, I'm excited to hear what other folks have to say about these unpopular orchid opinions. I was actually pleasantly surprised last time that no one got really particularly feisty or angry, and there was plenty of healthy debate, and I really appreciate that from my viewers. So I'd like to see the same thing happen again, and I look forward to speaking to all of you in the comments section. See ya.